Statements by ministers. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that I rise today in this House to pay tribute to the late Right Honourable John Turner, Canada's 17th Prime Minister. I knew John my whole life, and he believed fiercely in the values that make us who we are as Canadians. Values like treating everyone with dignity and respect, and always being willing to stand up for what is just and right. Today, we remember him as a House of Commons man, a strong advocate for equality and a champion of our democracy. Monsieur le Président, nous vivons dans un pays extraordinaire, et c'est en partie grâce à des gens comme John Turner. John a développé un attachement pour la démocratie très tôt dans sa vie. Déjà lorsqu'il était jeune, sa mère lui a appris l'importance du service public. Tout au long de sa carrière, d'abord comme avocat et par la suite comme politicien, il a toujours fait preuve d'élégance et d'humilité. John traitait tout le monde avec dignité et respect. Et même quand il était très occupé, il ne lui arrivait jamais d'oublier l'anniversaire de quiconque dans son entourage. Comme député, John a eu le privilège de servir 3 provinces différentes. Son excellente maîtrise du droit et du processus démocratique lui a permis d'apporter des changements majeurs au Code criminel. Son travail au ministère de la Justice a ouvert la voie à l'aide juridique au Canada pour que tous puissent faire reconnaître leurs droits, peu importe leur profil économique ou culturel. Ces changements ont transformé la vie de millions de Canadiens. Monsieur le Président, quand quelqu'un discutait avec John, c'était facile de voir à quel point il aimait le Canada. John parlait toujours de son pays avec énormément d'espoir et d'optimisme. Pour lui, le Canada, c'est un endroit où on s'entraide et où on respecte les autres. Un endroit où l'égalité est un style de vie. It was just last year that John was on the Hill to celebrate his 90th birthday with people from across the political spectrum. And I remember how he was still passionate about strengthening our democratic institutions. He used to say that democracy doesn't happen by accident. He was right. John knew that keeping our democracy strong and free meant we needed to put in the hard work to keep it that way. He believed in the incredible power of young people to get involved in our democratic process and encouraged them to do that wherever he could. John knew Canadians, regardless of age or background, formed the heart of our country, and that our future depended on all of us working together for everyone. Today, as we mourn his loss and reflect on his legacy, let's all remember our ability to give back to our own communities. To his wife, Gilles, and their children, Elizabeth, Michael, David, and Andrew, to John's grandchildren, his sister Brenda Norris, his brother-in-law, David Kilgore, your husband, loving father, and brother was a great Canadian. We are all so lucky you shared him with us. To my fellow Canadians, I invite you to join us in signing the virtual Book of Condolences, and together, let us continue to work to defend and strengthen our democracy, and as John once said, let's not take this country for granted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgar.
Monsieur le Président, au nom de l'opposition officielle et du Parti conservateur du Canada, j'ai l'honneur de rendre hommage à la mémoire de l'ancien Premier ministre de le très honorable John Turner. Mr. Speaker, some people leave their mark on this place in a way that outlasts them by decades. To walk the halls and to see their portraits is to be reminded daily that you stand where they stood. The tributes that have poured out to Mr. John Turner in the last week could easily lead one to believe and to think that the very existence of the modern Liberal Party is his greatest legacy. So many veterans of Martin and Chrétien campaigns of the 90s and early 2000s took to television, to social media, and to their local radio or newspaper this week to pay tribute to the man that they give credit with getting them involved in politics. Their stories had one common theme. They spoke to a plain truth that John Turner never forgot, that so many who have held the same lofty offices he did have never known. John Turner cared about individual Canadians, not just those that he encountered in the halls of power, where he spent more than 20 years as Attorney General, as a finance minister, as Prime Minister, and as leader of the opposition. Stories this week have been set in airplanes, taverns, church basements, and coffee shops. Stories of a man who took the extra time to know their stories and to remember their names. We have a tendency in moments like this to turn men into monuments. And with the Prime Minister with a past as an Olympian athlete and a Rhodes Scholar, that would be very easy to do. But to Canadians who shared their stories this week of a man who remembered their names years after first meeting them, of a politician who inspired them to get off the couch, of an adversary without a shred of malice in his heart, the John Turner who comes through is one who always had more interest in being a person than he ever had in being a portrait. As the story goes, and this is a very interesting one, and one when I first heard, Mr. Speaker, I did question, is this actually true? And when I tell you the story, for those of you who haven't heard it, I think you're going to share my awe in this story. So as the story goes, the young Liberal MP, John Turner, and his wife were vacationing in Barbados. While on the beach one morning, Mr. Turner's wife noticed a man out for a swim who appeared to be in trouble. The surf was rough that day. There was a strong undertow, and the elderly man was not a strong swimmer. Mr. Turner's wife anxiously alerted her husband to the situation. The young MP, who was a competitive swimmer in his university days, without hesitation plunged into the surf. Grasping the man in a life-saving hold, he struggled against the undertow and finally made it back to shore. Once on the beach, Mr. Turner set out to give the man mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. When the resuscitated gentleman came to his senses, who was the person that Mr. Turner had saved? None other than Progressive Conservative leader and former Prime Minister and the then Leader of the Opposition, John Diefenbaker. Isn't that unbelievable? It's one thing running into a colleague on a holiday. It's one thing running into an opposition colleague on a holiday. It's another thing saving that individual's life. But what an amazing story, and what a wonderful story. You know, Mr. Speaker, they say that the greatest compliments are those that come from your staunchest adversaries. And in spite of being one of his fiercest adversaries, former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney had this to say about Mr. Turner. And I quote, "The fact that he was a gentleman set him apart. He was Leader of the Opposition, and while we had many battles, there was no malice in the man. He was a man of principle. He brought a great sense of dignity to both himself and to the various jobs that he held. He always conducted himself with dignity and with elegance. I think he's going to be remembered as a Prime Minister and parliamentarian who contributed a great deal to Canada in the course of his highly successful life. He brought to politics a very good mind and a vision for Canada. He brought all those values, including integrity and dignity, to his job. He symbolized, I thought, much of what was best about Canada." What wonderful words, Mr. Speaker, and that was from our former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, about the Right Honourable John Turner. In closing, Mr. Speaker, history has taught us that we always knew where John Turner stood. It didn't matter if you were the Prime Minister he served, the Canadian people he faced, or the party that he dedicated his life to. He did the hard job for every Prime Minister he served, and from what I've heard, when he disagreed with them, they knew it. In fact, John Turner is the last finance minister to have resigned from cabinet on principle. Mr. Turner had all the qualities that you would want in a Canadian statesman, even when you disagreed with him, and sometimes especially when you disagreed with him. Mr. Speaker, our public life is richer for the contributions that the Right Honourable John Turner made. May he rest in peace. Wow. Merci beaucoup.
L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Né en Angleterre en 1929, John Napier Turner émigre au Canada avec sa mère en 1932 suite à la mort de son père. Véritable athlète, il a passé près de participer aux Jeux olympiques de Londres de 1948, mais a dû y renoncer après s'être blessé au genou. Même s'il était spécialiste du sprint, sa carrière politique relève plutôt d'un véritable marathon. La vie l'a amené vers la politique pour la première fois en 1962, alors qu'il est élu sous la bannière du Parti libéral du Canada dans la circonscription de Saint-Laurent-Saint-Georges sur l'île de Montréal. Homme ambitieux, il tenta de succéder à statesperson à la chefferie du Parti libéral 6 ans plus tard, en 1968. C'est plutôt Pierre Trudeau qui devient chef, puis premier ministre. Sous ce gouvernement, John Turner, alors ministre de la Justice, fut celui qui décriminalisa l'avortement et l'homosexualité. Ces changements au code criminel constituaient une avancée majeure pour les droits des femmes et de la communauté LGBT. C'est aussi à ce titre de ministre de la Justice qu'il appliqua la controversée loi sur les mesures de guerre lors de la crise d'octobre de 1970. Dès 1972, pour 3 ans, il accède au poste de ministre des Finances. On se souviendra que John Turner n'appréciait pas que le Québec soit absent de l'entente constitutionnelle de 1982. Et tandis que ses collègues du Parti libéral étaient farouchement opposés à la reconnaissance du caractère distinct du Québec, John Turner défendait plutôt l'accord du lac Meach. C'est d'ailleurs pour ces raisons que Jean Chrétien, son rival politique de toujours, l'accusait d'être mou face au Québec. C'est en 1984 que John Turner réalisa enfin son rêve, en remplaçant Pierre Trudeau à la tête du Parti libéral, puis comme premier ministre. Même si son mandat de premier ministre fut court, puisqu'il ne dura que 79 jours, John Turner, un homme loyal, demeure chef de l'opposition officielle jusqu'en 1990, et se retire finalement de la vie politique en 1993. Son importante contribution à la vie politique mérite, Monsieur le Président, d'être soulignée. Au nom du Bloc québécois, je souhaite mes plus sincères condoléances à tous les amis, les proches et la famille qui laissent aujourd'hui dans le deuil. Merci.
Bravo.
L'honorable député de New Westminster, Burnaby.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis aujourd'hui, on fait des éloges à John Napier Turner, qui a fait des contributions énormes à notre vie politique canadienne. With the passing of John Turner, we mourn a Prime Minister of Canada and a man who made incredible contributions to public life as a Minister of Finance, a Minister of Justice, briefly as Prime Minister, and as Leader of the Opposition in his decades of public life. John Turner was larger than life outside of politics as well, Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware, a Rhodes Scholar, a talented athlete, and a skilled lawyer. Ed Broadbent, former leader of the NDP, who served with him in Parliament, said of him that, quote, "Of all the party leaders I have known, he had the deepest respect for Parliament and for its democratic rules and procedures." In the end, though, he never did take his seat in Parliament as Prime Minister, 11 seats down from your seat, Mr. Speaker. We can talk about his contributions. We can certainly talk about his background. I would like to speak about his inspiration to so many Canadians. And I know this, Mr. Speaker, because of my own family history. My father, who is now 98, still married to my mother, is 97. We have good genes in New Westminster. Was a long-time school administrator, a teacher. He had won the high school basketball championship in British Columbia and was a school board trustee in New Westminster, Coquitlam, Burnaby. He had never run for higher office. But when John Turner became leader of the Liberal Party, he was inspired and sought and won the Liberal nomination. He ran for the Liberals in that riding, 20 years before I ran later for the NDP. And though that election did not turn out as neither my father nor John Turner had planned, the reality is John Turner inspired hundreds of candidates across the country and millions of Canadians, both in the election of 1984 and in 1988. Mr. Speaker, if you visit my father and mother's home in New Westminster, BC, you will see many pictures of John Turner with my father. And that inspiration that John Turner developed and provoked in so many Canadians is something that lives today. His deep respect for democracy is something that I think all Canadians admire. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, as you know, our democracy is as good and as strong as the caliber of representatives that Canadians choose for themselves. John Turner was an exemplary public servant, and he will be greatly missed. De la part du caucus du MPD et de notre chef, nos sincères condoléances à la famille et aux proches de John Napier Turner. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I believe the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands is rising on a point of order.
With permission of the House, unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, to also offer condolences on behalf of the Green Party.
Do we have unanimous consent? Agreed. Agreed. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, tous mes collègues. C'est un grand honneur pour moi de prendre la parole pour rendre hommage à mon ami, John Turner. I hope it's obvious, I'm of a different generation. And in any case anyone thinks I've changed sides, I'm wearing red today in honor of John Turner. I don't know how I became so lucky as to become someone that he considered worthy to be one of the few opposition MPs invited to what I think will go down in history as an extraordinary event, the 90th birthday party, June 10th of last year. John Turner did not approach reflections on his 90th birthday as someone who's out of it, who's not paying attention, who's just reflecting on the past. He gave a speech that was a clarion call to democracy. To his last days, he was engaged in the life of this country. He loved Canada so passionately, and his contribution to this country must not be underestimated. You know, when he was Minister of Justice, he gave us legal aid. He said everyone has to have access to the law. They have to have access to a defense. He also took the first step on the very long road to LGBTQ rights in ending the criminality of same-sex relations in this country through a change to the criminal code. He did much, and he was remembered and celebrated at that birthday party, as you've now heard from Brian Mulroney by video, but living prime ministers present, the Right Honourable Joe Clark, who gave a spectacular address, Right Honourable Paul Martin, Right Honourable Jean Chrétien, an extraordinary evening. I want to give my condolences, of course, to Gilles, to Elizabeth, to granddaughter Fiona, and to my dear friends Laura and David Kilgore, family members of someone who exemplifies what it means. We use the word rather casually sometimes. Someone is a great Canadian. John Turner is the exemplar of what that looks like. John Turner was a great Canadian. And rather than spend any more time telling you things that I've learned about him, although I have to tell you, he fought so hard against the creation of PMO as a big-time institution. He was there working for our current Prime Minister's father, and Tom Axworthy famously relates how when he was working for Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Tom Axworthy was sent with a message for John Turner, Minister of Finance. And Turner said to him, you just tell the boss, you go back there and tell him I don't need some junior G-man from PMO coming around here to tell me what to do. So those were the days. Well, it's taken a while. I do want to end what I'm saying by quoting what John Turner told us on his birthday. Quote, and it goes to the essence of what he meant by saying democracy does not happen by accident, as the Prime Minister has mentioned. He said that often. Quote, I don't like the use of the term backbencher when describing MPs. It is the MP who holds a prominent position in the House of Commons. My thinking on this is honed from the Magna Carta, one of the greatest pieces of democracy ever. Written in 1215, it laid out the essence of democracy in Great Britain and became the template of democracy worldwide. There's a pause here where he reflects on Magna Carta and the importance of the people voting and the people who are elected occupying the position of government. He says, it's so different today where prime ministers, I want to make sure that's plural so no one thinks they're being singled out. It's so different today where prime ministers act in a manner that I can only describe as unilateral. The most important part of democracy, in my view, is that people govern people. We have to hold that principle sacred, where debate and opinion of people matter. Democracy does not happen by accident. Thank you, John Turner, for your constant reminder that we have to contribute to our society, that we have to give back. He lived under principles of faith as a devout Catholic. He understood that that which we do to each other, we can expect to be done unto us, and we have an obligation to the entire family of humanity. Eternal rest grant unto him. Light perpetual shine upon him. May he rest in peace.
I am grateful that we are able to come together today to pay our respects to our colleague as members of Parliament, members of the parliamentary family. During and even beyond his long political career, John Turner was a passionate defender of our parliamentary democracy. Ensemble, nous pouvons commémorer la vie du 17e Premier ministre du Canada. J'invite les députés à se lever pour observer 1 minute de silence.